Our third type of reaction is going to be oxidation-reduction reactions. Another name for this is redox. The RED comes from reduction, and the OX comes from oxidation. Redox reactions are going to be reactions in which electrons are transferred from one reactant to another. They're essentially jumping from one chemical to another chemical. This type of reaction has two processes going on, oxidation and reduction. Oxidation is defined as the loss of electrons, and reduction is defined as the gain of electrons. I remember these two terms by the mnemonic, Leo the lion says grr. LEO stands for loss of electrons is oxidation. GER stands for gain of electrons is reduction. We're going to be looking at different chemicals in our reaction and seeing whether they're gaining or losing electrons. If they lose electrons, they are being oxidized, and if they gain electrons, they are being reduced. I've heard other mnemonics as well. One of them is oil rig. OIL, oxidation is loss. RIG, reduction is gain. I don't like that one as much because it doesn't specify loss or gain of what. This one specifies that we're losing or gaining electrons. This is especially important because electrons have a negative charge, so gaining electrons makes an atom's charge go down, which can confuse students sometimes. A simple redox example is the reaction of sodium and chlorine to make sodium chloride. When we do redox reactions, it's going to be generally helpful to split them into two half reactions and focus on those two parts of the reaction separately. In this example, one half reaction is going to be focused on the sodium, and the other half reaction is going to be focused on the chlorine. For the first half reaction, we look at what is happening to the sodium in the original equation. Based on the balanced reaction, two sodium solids are going into the reaction, and two sodium ions are being produced as part of the sodium chloride ionic compound. Since each sodium ion has a +1 charge, that means each sodium solid has lost one electron to make the sodium ion. So there are a total of 2 electrons being lost from the sodium solids to make the sodium ions. We want each side of our reactions to be balanced in terms of charge. There is 0 overall charge on the left side of the sodium half reaction, and the right side there are 2 +1s from the sodium ions and 2 -1s from the electrons. +2 and -2 make 0 overall on the right side. If you're not sure whether the electrons should be on the left or the right side of the arrow, put them on the side that will enable both sides of the arrow to have the same charge as each other. It doesn't always have to equal 0, but the two sides have to be the same as each other. We can focus on whether the sodium is gaining or losing electrons as part of this reaction. In this reaction, the sodium is losing 2 electrons. Writing the 2 electrons on the product side shows that they're being lost from the initial reactant of sodium solid. Essentially, we're plucking electrons away, and that's what makes the sodium +1 ions. Electrons are being lost from the sodium reactant. Remember, loss of electrons is oxidation. That's the Leo part of the Leo the lion says grr. Therefore, we would say that sodium is being oxidized. The second half reaction involves the chlorine. The chlorine is gaining 2 electrons to become the Cl-1 ions. The neutral chlorine gains 2 electrons, and they're written on the left side of the arrow. So they're essentially going to be reactants. The electrons are being added to the neutral chlorine atoms to make the chloride ions. Electrons are being gained by the chlorines to make anions. Remember, anions have a negative charge, so electrons are being added to make it become negative. Again, those chloride ions are part of that sodium chloride ionic compound, but we're just focusing on the chlorine part of it. Because the chlorine is gaining electrons, we would say that the chlorine is reduced. Gain of electrons is reduction, GER. We've talked about splitting our reactions into half reactions, and it is really helpful to think about them in that way. However, These half reactions are not happening by themselves. They're happening together at the same time, and they're helping each other. The loss of the electron from the sodium helps the chlorine to be reduced. So we would call sodium the reducing agent. The thing that's causing the reduction to happen is the sodium. The sodium is enabling the chlorine to be reduced. Since the chlorine is taking electrons away from the sodium, that allows the sodium to be oxidized. So we can call chlorine the oxidizing agent. Chlorine is the substance that is causing the other substance in the reaction, the sodium, to be oxidized. A good rule of thumb is that whatever is oxidized is the reducing agent, and whatever is reduced is the oxidizing agent. We might say that chlorine is reduced or that it's the oxidizing agent, depending on whether we are talking about what is happening to the chlorine or what the chlorine is doing to something else.